Welcome to Blanket Tech Part 1. Today we're going to look at wool blankets for use, specifically bedding and wearing a wool blanket. We're also going to look at the different things to consider when going to purchase a wool blanket. But before we get started with that, let's talk about how Mother Nature works. Heat is attracted to cold. Simply put, heat is leaving you for the cold. There are 5 heat loss mechanisms that need to be considered: conduction, convection, radiation, respiration, and evaporation. For the purposes of our discussion today around wool blankets, we're going to focus on conduction. It should also be worth noting that the majority of heat loss from the body comes from the head and neck, so you need to address that as well. The ground, unfortunately, is a very good conductor. It will take the heat right out of you, as most people know. You have to address ground insulation when using a wool blanket in the cold. In fact, the ground can be 3 times the conductor of the surrounding air. So when you're thinking of your ground insulation, think of it as, I need 3 times as much between me and the ground as I do from a cover as it relates to the air. Wool, fortunately for us, is a good, or a poor conductor, I should say. Being hollow animal hair, it is a good insulator, so therefore it is a poor conductor. It also is hygroscopic, meaning that it will and wants to hold or suspend moisture. In fact, it can do up to or around 50% of its own weight in moisture suspension before you'll start feeling cold. It's a great thing about wool being a poor conductor. Bad thing is that when it does get wet, it is a pain to dry out, but boy is it worth it. So, let's talk about some other things as it relates to wool. 3 things to consider when looking at a wool blanket: its bulk, its density, and its fluff. The 2 blankets before you right now are a U.S. Army wool blanket on the left and a Pendleton on the right. As it relates to their bulk, which is the mass, it's actually pretty close. They weigh relatively the same. The density of these blankets is actually different. That would be the compactness or the tightness of the weave. The one on the left is a more tightly woven blanket. The one on the right is a tight weave, but it is looser than the U.S. Army blanket on the left. And then the last thing to look at is the fluff, or the material. The one on the left is 100% pure wool. The one on the right is about, I think it's a blend of 90% wool, 10% cotton. So the material is somewhat different. Kephart said, "The warmest blanket for its weight is not a close woven one, but one that is loose woven and fluffy." So obviously the blanket on the right, being more fluffy and loose woven, even though the bulk is the same as both these blankets, the one on the right is going to be considerably warmer. That may or may not necessarily be the right choice. Personally, I think a lot depends on what you're going to do with your wool blanket. If I was going to be traipsing all over the landscape with just one blanket, and I needed something that was going to be durable, that didn't pick up a lot of debris, that was going to be used over a long period of time that I was relying on, I would probably be more interested in the military blanket. So let's take a look at a couple other common blankets that I happen to have right here. Everybody's interested in these Italian wool blankets. And these blankets are actually pretty tightly woven. They have a lot of bulk, not a whole lot of fluff. So for its weight, it's actually pretty warm, very durable, and great for those that are using them outdoors. This is just a personal blanket from the family, an old Orlaskin, and loosely woven, a lot of fluff, decent bulk. This is a warm blanket, nice for the house. Another blanket that I happen to have here is a Swiss Army blanket. Good fluff, tightly woven, decent bulk. This is a good all-around blanket. And then here are a couple Hudson Bays, 3.5 points, really old blankets, and these things are just, really don't get a whole lot better in my opinion. Very tightly woven, decent bulk, could be a little bit more, and not so bad fluff. So let's put some of these to use. So I'm going to show you one way to use your wool blanket as bedding material. This is something that you can or don't have to use with a fire. And if you would, Emerson, would you lie down for me?
Okay.
So you're going to want to lie yourself down diagonally, center yourself in such a way that you check and make sure that you've got somewhat of a head covering with your wool blanket. Obviously you're going to have a wool blanket of significant size to make this work. And then the person is going to actually tuck their feet in first as best they can, trying to get themselves warm. And then you're going to want to consider which side you're going to lay on if you're a side sleeper. So if you're a left side sleeper, what I like to do, not that I use this configuration very much, but is go with the left side, and you're going to want to tuck it underneath your hips to lock it in. And then what you'll do is you'll reach back over on your other side, and you're going to want to tuck yourself in on your hips this way, and then roll over on your left side, and you're in a cocoon. Now again, as we discussed earlier, majority of your heat loss comes through your head and your neck, so you're going to want to make sure that that's addressed. And you don't want to put your breath into the wool blanket if you can help it and add moisture to the situation. So making sure you got yourself covered is a good way to go. But this is just one configuration of wrapping yourself up in a wool blanket. Alright, here's another way to configure your bedding with a wool blanket. This is the one I actually prefer. And what you do is you simply fold your blanket in half, leaving it lengthwise, fold it in half, and then at the end you'll fold it over again and you'll create a foot box. Now, I've got two blanket pins here, one securing the foot box and one a little bit farther up. So this really becomes something like a sleeping bag, and there is an art to sleeping in one of these to avoid drafts and cold spots, so it does take a little bit of practice. But the way it works is you simply, again, you've created somewhat of a sleeping bag. Obviously you want to, go ahead Duncan, would you hop in there for me, buddy?
Okay.
Obviously what you want to do, slide all the way down, if you can. What you want to do is obviously address your ground insulation. As we talked about earlier, the majority of your heat loss is going to come through your head and neck, so you'll want to address that as well. But your feet are taken care of with this foot box. This is just a comfortable way to sleep in a wool blanket, in my opinion, particularly with a fire. It's a good way to, if you are hot next to the fire, to adjust your heat accordingly. But it really doesn't get much easier than this, and we will look at some other things besides an actual blanket pin itself before we're done talking about wool blankets. But this is like a sleeping bag, pretty easy. Wool blankets are just so versatile. They're, obviously bedding is one use. Wearing them is another one, and I'm going to show you a way to do so. A lot of folks, you need a blanket pin for this, or you would think you would, but a lot of folks actually, if they don't have a metal blanket pin, they'll take make a wooden pin and they'll stick it through their wool blanket and then put a wrap around it. Not a big deal on a loose woven blanket. I don't like doing that on a tightly woven blanket. So here's an alternative to that. And when you go to wear your wool blanket, take it lengthwise this way, and then obviously start with your hood. Now if it's a thin enough blanket, you can get away with just doing one button. So I'm going to say I want this button. Bear with me here, make sure this is even. I'm going to say I want this button right in here. So what I have is a rock that I'm going to stick through or into both ends of the blanket. So here's my button, and then I'm simply going to put a clove hitch over this and tighten it down. So there's my button. And now the different things you can do with this. Obviously this can be your
your hood up here. You can roll it back, get it out of your face if need be. What I like doing is taking the ends and I will stick them up on the inside over my shoulder. Kind of gets them out of the way, and it actually gives you some additional warmth by the other layer right there. So from here, if you want, you can actually bring this up and over your shoulders. Put the hood on. And now I've got a shawl. That's one way to wear it. If it's cooler out and your lower extremities need to be kept warm, you can actually use a belt with this and wrap it around yourself. And I simply tied a bowline into this and then do a slippery hitch, or you could take a rope and fold it over halfway. All different sorts of things you can do. So here's my slippery hitch. Lock it down. Another hitch. You can also push this back if you need more maneuverability. Again, here's my hood. So a lot of different things you can do with a wool blanket. This, and I've actually worn it around the house, is actually pretty warm. You can really get yourself covered up if need be. And again, I like holding this thing back. Help keeps it out of your face. Do I look warm? Thanks.